afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Hydrogen Full Court Press interview, where every week we have a guest to discuss and assess what the latest hydrogen opportunities are, the challenges that stakeholders are facing to advance the hydrogen story, and some of the solutions that are being put forward. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Mr. René Peters, who is the Business Director of Gas Technology at TNO, based in the Netherlands. So thank you, René, for joining us today. Your title has the word technology in it, and of course that is absolutely a key element to the hydrogen story and how far it's got so far. And a lot of the people say that actually technology has come quite far in hydrogen, and that today it's not a problem. Really, it's regulation that seems to be kind of slightly lagging behind, and you're obviously based in Europe, so let's look at it from the European angle first, and then we can maybe take it a bit more global. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. It's about setting up completely new value chains for hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, whatever. So we have to develop the production of hydrogen on a large scale. We have to develop the whole transport and storage, and maybe also cross-border transport of hydrogen, and link it to the demand side, so to the markets. And you could say all the individual components are there. The technologies are basically ready in their basic concepts. Although, of course, as a technology institute, I will always say that there's a lot of technology development still to be done, especially on electrolyzer technology and PEM and solid oxide type of technologies. We can discuss it separately, but indeed the main challenge to get hydrogen into the market is these new value chains and allowing, for example, cross-border transport, and apart from regulations, of course, it's also the economics, which needs stimulation on both ends, on the production side, but also on the market, the demand side, obviously.
Okay, and I mean, and on the regulatory front, or let's talk about definitions, even the taxonomy, the whole part of we have the whole energy transition taxonomy that's still even in development. You could argue we don't even have a carbon price agreed to yet in the world, at least globally, as you said, cross-border. But how much progress do you expect that we will see on that sort of definition, certification, for people to know that if they're going to invest in green hydrogen, they're going to get rewarded, really? Where are we on that?
Yeah, well, I think Europe is really taking the lead on this. In Europe, of course, we do have a CO2 tax, the ETS system, which values CO2 emissions, and the cost of CO2 emissions is rising over the last years towards 80-90 euros per ton, and that is really driving also transition from gas moving away towards, for example, blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. It helps. It's probably not sufficient to get the whole chains going, but it helps. And also the taxonomy of hydrogen and low carbon definitions of the different, we used to call them colors, blue, green, yellow, turquoise, what have you. It's now in this taxonomy definition that is proposed by the European Commission. Which helps on one way, because it defines what is a green investment that the market could invest in as a green investment, and what is not. It does also introduce some new hurdles, because, for example, for green hydrogen, it is proposed to require a direct link to the production of green hydrogen, or the electricity needed for green hydrogen, and the electrolysis use, even on a quarterly hour basis, in a direct link. And that may be quite challenging, at least for the start of the market, to realize that and to make then the case economic. So just a PPA connection between production of electricity and production of hydrogen is not sufficient in this proposal. So that doesn't help. On the other hand, the requirements by the RED III directive, for example, to have for industrial applications over 50% of green hydrogen into the hydrogen use is, of course, a stimulation for green hydrogen again. So there's different aspects who are positive in a way to drive towards the hydrogen economy. And there are some who could say may not help immediately, and on the long term they are needed, but on the short term they may be hindering more a quick introduction to hydrogen. So it's a sort of a balanced mix. And here I'm only talking about Europe, of course.
Yeah.
So I think Europe is leading in this, but well, the others have to follow as well to make it a global market.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned electrolyzers earlier in terms of that's one part of technology where we still need to be able to scale up those electrolyzers to obviously bring the costs down. Is there enough interest in the funding investment side of things from the private sector into that, or do we need the government to hold the private sector's hand in bringing this solution forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think now, at least in Europe, there's a huge interest by both the manufacturers of electrolyzers to scale up to gigawatt level scale factories. But they will only do that if there's clarity on the long-term developments and demands for electrolyzers, of course. So clear policies and strategies from governments and clear targets on the scale of electrolyzer volumes that are needed in the next 10 years is really a requirement to get the industry investing in more production capacity. But saying this, I think every OEM in Europe, whether it's ITM in the UK, it's Siemens in Germany, it's Nel, they all have plans for expanding their production factories to gigawatt scale. So the announcements are there, the willingness to invest is there. But indeed, for the users and the buyers and the operators of the electrolyzers and the hydrogen factories in the end, they need a little bit more, well, I think it's financially support and also clarity on policies to be able to invest in these large-scale factories. But I think everybody, every big player in Europe is targeting large-scale applications of electrolysis for green hydrogen production at the moment. So the plans are there. We're still waiting for the support schemes by the European Commission or on the national level to fund these projects. For example, under the common name of projects of common interest, which allows countries to fund these projects to a higher level than traditionally allowed according to the European schemes.
Okay, and in terms of green hydrogen, this region where I'm sitting, which is the Middle East, the Gulf, there's a lot of investment here, huge new projects into hydrogen initiatives in the Saudi Arabia and the UAE, where a lot of joint ventures, in some cases with European companies, obviously joining them with the expertise coming from Europe. But clearly we're blessed here with plenty of sunshine. The renewable energy story is very good, very strong. Those costs have been brought down in the last 10 years. And the Middle East stakeholders here who are looking into hydrogen are always having this debate of, do we need to be targeting our domestic market first as consumers, as off-takers, or should we just be focusing ourselves on exporting to Europe, because that is really Europe's waiting for this.
Yes.
So how prepared is Europe's infrastructure to receive Middle East hydrogen, if you like?
Very good question. I think it's very important to realize indeed that Europe will always be a very important import market for hydrogen in the end. We have made assessments on the amount of hydrogen that we could produce from our own renewable sources, either solar or wind or hydro. And that those volumes will never be able to keep up the demand growth that is expected. We made the analysis recently for the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium, which is a strong industrial cluster, a chemical cluster, which needs a lot of hydrogen. We will definitely need to import basically from day one. So it's important to develop import facilities in Europe to be able to receive the cheap potential hydrogen products coming from, amongst others, the Middle East, but also other regions in the world probably. And the industry is also working on that. So Rotterdam, the port of Rotterdam, for example, is very active to develop its first receiving terminals for ammonia, maybe for liquid organic hydrogen carriers, maybe even liquefied hydrogen in the end. And to be able to serve as an important import hub for the Northwest Europe region for hydrogen or hydrogen-derived products. Well, ammonia is probably one of the first carriers that will be used as the cheapest and the most easy way to transport hydrogen in large volumes. I think the projects like NEOM in Saudi Arabia, of course, is focusing a lot on producing ammonia as a way to carry the hydrogen to Europe or to other markets. And also the ammonia itself could, of course, be used as a basic chemical product for all types of process. Well, fertilizer being the most common one. And thereby the value of green ammonia could be valued in its end product directly without having to crack it down to green hydrogen to start the business and to start the value change going. And some companies who are linked to these import terminals, like Vopak, storage operator, they're very keen on taking the lead in this import value chain and setting up projects, with several countries, also in the Middle East, but also Portugal, Morocco, even further South America, to get these value chains going. But definitely Northwest Europe will be a big importer of hydrogen and hydrogen-derived products from the coming years. I would say from 25, 26 onwards, I see the first import projects started.
Yeah, and I mean, and of course you've got the hydrogen. And Europe's very keen on green hydrogen. Of course, here in the Middle East, we've got abundant natural gas, and blue hydrogen is ready today. It's also being invested in, along with new projects in green. Should we be looking at things as blue or green, or how do you see those moving in tandem? And for how long should they be moving in tandem?
Yeah, good question. Well, in the Netherlands, we're quite practical. Sometimes we say we're color blind with respect to hydrogen. We don't care whether it's green or blue or a turquoise or whatever. At least it should be low carbon. So even with blue, large capture of CO2 should be realized high percentage and stored or used recycled, to make sure that it's a low carbon product. But there's different views in Europe, I should say. Germany is quite keen on indeed focusing on green only. So not every country is looking the same way to which type of hydrogen should be preferred. Maybe you're aware also in the Netherlands we have plans for our own blue hydrogen production plants in Rotterdam, and maybe a second one in Den Helder. And also in the UK, of course, plans for both blue hydrogen and green hydrogen are underway. And that's also because we do have CO2 storage options, of course, in the North Sea, in our depleted gas fields. So we don't have a clear preference for green or grey. In Europe, I think that there is a focus for green, obviously, and it's clearly stated that should be a significant part in the mix when you're using hydrogen on the industrial scale. So that will drive probably more towards green. And then your question was about, is there probably in this mix a sort of a period of overlap, or maybe a change going from blue to green? It's often said that blue should be an intermediate solution and we should end up in green. And that might be the case. At the same time, we see the volumes of hydrogen demand growing so fast in industry. And that's not only the chemical or the refining industry, but also steel industry, maybe mobility sector, heavy duty transport, that we think we need for a long time all the options that are available on the market. Because let's be fair, blue hydrogen can be developed quite quickly at large volumes at relatively low cost, compared to green hydrogen, which needs a huge amount of renewable power and will start up at a much lower pace and a lot smaller scale, and also at higher cost. And also transporting the hydrogen from the Middle East, of course, is not cheap and not for nothing. So I think blue hydrogen will be part of the mix for a long time. And we may even need it for a very long time, because we don't have the luxury to just leave it out of the mix and replace it with green, because we cannot keep on demand.
Well, particularly today, with all the I mean, it brings the whole hydrogen. Anyway, it was gaining a lot of momentum, the hydrogen story, the last year or two during COVID and the different. And now, of course, we have Europe facing an immediate energy crisis with the war happening in Ukraine and everything else. Obviously, it's compounding that. So I suppose that's brought it right. We need as much choice as we can get, and as much immediate supply as we can get. You mentioned the different sectors and uses that will demand off-takers, basically, that will take in hydrogen. Are there any of those, the steel versus heavy transport versus I'm not sure which other sector you mentioned there, but
the heavy duty transport, I think, yeah.
Are any of those in any way today would favor the green or blue more? I mean, of course, there's the cost element, but are there certain sectors more likely to
well, it's clear that the current use of hydrogen is mostly in the refining and the chemical business. They are all, of course, 99% gray hydrogen at the moment, produced from steam reforming. Many of those applications would be happy with actually blue hydrogen, and many of the refineries, which are now using a lot of hydrogen also for hydrogen cracking and upgrading, they are considering blue hydrogen as their first and easiest way to convert from gray to blue hydrogen. Actually, some of the projects, you may know, the Porthos CO2 capture project in the Netherlands is actually linked to a hydrogen production facility, which is currently producing gray hydrogen for the refineries in the Netherlands, and then will turn it into blue. But if you talk about mobility, heavy duty mobility, and then in particular trucks, well, they will use very pure hydrogen for their fuel cell electric mobility. That will focus more on the green hydrogen market, obviously. But if you look at the steel market, for example, which could be a huge demand for hydrogen in the future, they don't care that much about the purity of the hydrogen. That they may even need to have some carbon in their gas to be able to reduce the iron oxide in their process in the first steps for the reduction of the iron ore. And they can handle hydrogen at a much lower purity than that is delivered by green hydrogen. So blue hydrogen could be perfect for that as well. So indeed, there's difference in markets, and there's also, of course, differences in willingness to pay for this purity of the hydrogen. And maybe it's not even the best option to use the very high pure green hydrogen for applications which do not demand this high purity, like in burners or in power generation. I mean, driving a gas turbine, you don't need green hydrogen for that.
You mentioned the fuel cell electricity mobility. Where is that? In terms of when you look at the different I suppose, demands, centers and off-takers and technology. Where would you say the priority today? Which technology should we be focusing on to develop more and more quickly? What needs the most attention?
Do you mean the market applications or the technologies to produce the hydrogen, or to
the actual technology to produce it? Sorry, to produce it. I mean, we talked about electrolyzers clearly in terms of the result. Is there any other area?
Yeah, obviously the technology which is most mature and has been in place, of course, already for decades, I think even for 100 years, is the alkaline technology, which traditionally, of course, was not developed for hydrogen production, but for chlor-alkaline production facilities by Norwegian companies, Nel, for example. And they are produced for the chlorine production, and hydrogen was a byproduct. And now it's being applied also for water electrolysis and direct hydrogen production. It's the most mature technology, but at the same time, it's, for example, much less flexible, and the energy intensity of the process is smaller than with the new technologies, which, for example, PEM is then the second best mature technology. And PEM technology, which is the proton exchange membrane technology, is actually a technology which is capable, for example, in handling the dynamics of the wind or solar production profiles of electricity, and delivering most of the hydrogen at relative low cost in a dynamic operating environment, which makes it also very suitable for technology that we are looking at in the Netherlands to bring this to an offshore environment in combination with offshore wind production, and actually produce green hydrogen on offshore platforms to bring the energy straight to the market and to shore via pipelines. Well, that is something which PEM technology is much more capable of doing than alkaline technology. And what also helps here is that the footprint of PEM technology is much less than for alkaline. So you can fit much more capacity on a square meter, which is of course extremely relevant if you put it in offshore environment on platforms. So that technology is let's say the second best maturing technology, and then the third one that's being worked on is solid oxide technology, but that's much more on high temperature processes, and that's less mature, but has its specific application areas which might be relevant in the future as well.
Okay, and I mean, would you say, René, that we mentioned just a few minutes ago the current, I suppose, shift within the EU and realization, a bit late perhaps, but that we should not be putting all our eggs in one basket, particularly from the sort of reliance on gas from Russia in this case, and of course there's the oil story, but the oil one is perhaps a little less critical, and certainly for certain members of the EU. Do you think that this new vulnerability of energy security, if you like, do you think that to propel the hydrogen argument forward more? Are we going to see it being talked about at COP as even more than it is already? We've seen billions of dollars poured into these solutions, but is it enough?
Yeah, no, a good question, and indeed, the EU has realized that hydrogen can really be a good alternative in many applications for natural gas. So the Repower EU proposal has actually doubled the ambition of the European Commission on deployment of green hydrogen electrolysis technology, moving from 10 megaton per year to 20 megaton per year in 2030. That's quite an ambition and quite a high target if you realize that at the moment we are talking about megawatt scale, and then we'll have to go to tens of gigawatt scale electrolyzers in just a few years, less than a decade. So the ambitions are extremely high. Of course, there we have to be careful, because if we replace natural gas with blue hydrogen, it doesn't help that much in becoming less dependent on gas, because the source of energy with blue hydrogen is natural gas, or of course fuel gases from industrial processes. And that's why I think there's also a drive then to move faster to green hydrogen, because that's where really the reduction of the dependence on natural gas is realized. And hydrogen could be, in many cases, of course, a very good alternative for natural gas, in the refining business, in the chemical business, in even power generation for balancing the grid. So indeed, the European Commission wants to speed up and accelerate the deployment of green hydrogen and electrolysis technology in general, but also at the same time accelerate the import capacity for hydrogen from abroad, because the argument I mentioned earlier that the Netherlands will be very much dependent on import is equally valuable for Europe. Europe will be very much dependent on import on hydrogen from day one. So the European Commission also targets a lot of hydrogen production and import from outside Europe.
Well, René Peters, Business Director of Gas Technology at TNO, I'm afraid we've run out of time very quickly, but thank you so much for your insight on the whole hydrogen technology story. And it certainly has been moving exponentially, and we would expect it to continue to do so. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you.